No.
Would you be so kind to pass this down to our fellow panelists? Thank you so much. It's a microphone. If you put it between the two of you, it will pick it up for the recording. Thank you. Are you one of our panelists?
Yes, I am.
My apologies.
It's a big one. Do you want me to scooch over one?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much. Just scooch in a little.
I was thrown off because nobody left.
Oh, there you go. If you'd like to scoot in. Wonderful. Well, shall we start? Excellent. Sir, down at the end of the table, would you like to introduce yourself?
And tell us how many followers you have.
So I'm Jim Doty. I write and publish under my initials JL Doty. And I have about 20 published novels in 4 or 5 series. And I am both traditionally published and self-published. And I've been far more successful at self-publishing. And I'm not sure if I'm right for this panel or not, because I don't use social media much in the sense of I don't use it at all trying to sell, okay, which you should never do, but in any case. I do rather well with Amazon advertising and sometimes with Facebook advertising.
I'm Tim White. I'm a mostly horror thriller author, published, I think I'm at 8 books right now. I also have 0 followers because I don't use any social media, but I have used it extensively in the past. There are many reasons I don't use it anymore. I don't think it's unilaterally bad for everybody, but there's a lot more your mileage may vary than we're often told.
I agree with that.
So.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I'm Corey Doctor. I write science fiction novels, among other things, and I also work in policy as it relates to online services. Sometimes that includes social media, and sometimes that work also involves using social media. So I've been involved in several very large geopolitical campaigns that harness social media. We organized the largest ever street protests against a European Union directive in 2019 with the Digital Single Markets Directive over a rule that directly impacted social media, one that would have required anyone who had a platform where the public could speak to implement a copyright filter that would scan everything that was posted, see if it matched a database of claimed works that would somehow come into existence, no one knew how, and automatically block if it matched one of those. We mobilized 500,000 people in about 30 European cities and built the largest petition in world history, over 5 million people. In the end, that rule did pass. There was a key vote in the European Parliament, which we lost by 5 votes. Subsequently, 10 MEPs said that they pressed the wrong button. So it was a close run thing. I use social media a lot in my own professional promotion to make my work happen. I'm published traditionally, but also for complicated reasons, do my own audiobooks. And my promotion channel is mostly social media. And I've been around the social media world since the earliest days. I was one of the first few Twitter users and so on. So,
Did you cancel your ex?
I have not, and we can talk about why.
Shame on you.
No, we can talk about why. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Madam Askew, and if you've been a longtime attendee of TUSCon, you're very familiar with me. I'm a weird entertainer and performer on the internet, and I use social media a lot professionally because for many reasons, which we'll discuss. And also, I'm an event host, and somehow I ended up being kind of like a weird queer activist in geek spaces because also for lots of reasons, which I think are obvious. But I'm very happy to be here and to discuss social media with all of you. And I have a tiny fucking following, which is fine.
Hello, I'm Tam Cronin, and I muscled myself onto this panel because I have social media moderation experience for 7.5 years, including working at Cognizant when they had the Facebook account. So,
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, welcome. I don't know if anyone is moderating, but I'm happy to make sure the conversation flows if that's comfortable. Great. So thank you all for joining us today. And I just want to talk a little bit about, we've got some people who don't use social media and some of us who do. And I'd love to hear about what you think the disadvantage is of using social media to be your presence in the virtual world. Mr. Doty, would you give us a start with that?
I enjoy using social media to stay in contact with friends and fans if they want to. And I think to me it's more that you can't do everything, and that's a danger you can get into. And so I'm not opposed to social media, but I have other avenues that work better for me, and I find them more fruitful than trying to pitch my books on social media. And so there's nothing wrong with that, but I think you have to decide what works for you and what you want to spend your time on. And if you can make the mistake of trying to do everything, and then you're really going to get in trouble.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll kind of quickly hit on what I think are three big ones. There's the really obvious one we hear about a lot, which is, there's a real danger in making a platform you don't own and don't control your primary hub. I know way too many authors with horror stories about losing everything overnight.
Explain how that happens, please.
So I know a number of authors who, have had basically one gathering place for their fans, which is like a Facebook page or something. And then Facebook decides, either intentionally or maybe through some kind of mistake, this group no longer exists. It's deleted or it's banned or something. And then overnight, the author has 50, 100,000 fans they can no longer contact in any way.
So they a couple years ago, they notified me one day that your account is, I forget what they called it. It's this type of account, and we can no longer support that, and we're going to close it down. And you have like 2 months to fix that. And they wouldn't tell me how to fix it, and I couldn't fucking fix it. I sent them emails and said, tell me how to fix it, and I'll goddamn well fix it. And they wouldn't. I got no response.
That's because there's no humans to respond to
I
you.
spent hours looking for ways of contacting them, and then they shut the account down. And I lost all my followers and all my friends, and so that's one reason I'm a little leery of it. So I'm sorry, but you reminded me.
That's basically what I was talking about. I think there's at least two other big reasons. Anybody know Greg McEwen, Essentialism? He's really big in the productivity space.
I know of him.
Cal Newport, James Clear, he's in that circle. I'm a huge fan of his in terms of how I work. I adopted his system about 8 years ago, and in a very quick nutshell, it's you can only do one or maybe two big things at a time and do them well.
Unless you're quick on growth.
And I think in my experience, social media has definitely been a thing that for it to even have a chance of working, it needs a major investment of time or energy or money, which means somebody else's time and energy that I just don't have. And then number three, which doesn't get talked about a lot, there are different authors who write different types of books. I'm a slow writer. I write big books that take a long time, and the social media algorithms are not designed for that. Social media is all about quick, repeated engagement, and if you're a low and slow guy like I am, it's going to be much harder to make it work for you.
Yeah, I heard someone recently say that they thought that the problem of social media is that there's too much media and not enough social. And I think that's broadly true. I think that, to the extent that social media works for creative workers, it's because it creates a social and sometimes parasocial relationship between creators and their audiences, and that this has a kind of durability that the more shallow parasocial relationship that might just be a relationship with the work rather than with the worker who made it. It transcends that, and we've seen writers pull on those strings when they've had medical emergencies or personal problems. You may recall there's a Canadian science fiction writer called Peter Watts who got into trouble at the U.S. border and got beaten up and raised money for by a U.S. border guard and raised money for his legal defense, and so on. So this is where it works. And what's happened for complicated reasons is that social media has become much more like a media platform. And so in many ways, it's not interested in this kind of facilitation of community that would require that kind of deep knowledge of context that would be able to distinguish between someone whose account was on the wrong side and someone whose account was on the right side. It's not worth it for them to make those calls. Firms that get beyond a certain size, they're not just too big to fail, they're too big to care. And I think that while there are some factors that drive scale in social media, famously, social media is a network effect driven service. You want to be on the social media where the people you want to talk to are. Once you're there, you're a reason for other people to come. But there's nothing inherent that says that can't work as a double-edged sword. Historically, we've had lots of platforms that interoperated. So you could leave one social media platform, go to another one, and people could still talk to you and you could still talk to them. And that created a kind of ease of movement, a borderlessness between these walled cities that meant that if they really wanted to keep your business, they had to be good to you and not just count on the fact that the pain of leaving was too high. I sometimes think about social media like the movie Fiddler on the Roof, where, the basic premise of this movie is that every 15 minutes, Cossacks ride through the shtetl and kick the shit out of everyone. And then after 2.5 hours, they get sick of it and the Tsar kicks them out and they leave. And that's sad because they're never going to see each other again. And I feel like that's social media, right? Every 15 minutes, Mark Zuckerberg or someone who he's decided to either take money from to run rampant on the platform, or he's not willing to pay money to stop them from running on the platform, rides through and kicks the shit out of us. And the only thing sadder than that would be him kicking us off, because then we wouldn't be able to talk to each other anymore. And I think that once you understand that conundrum, you understand, I think, the points of view of people who don't use it. One way through this that at least some practitioners have talked about is something whose acronym is POSSE, Post, Own Site, Syndicate Everywhere, or Share Everywhere. And the idea is that you create canonical links to your work, whether that is your sociable running discourse and your dialogue with other people, or your anchoring posts that are, thoughtful longer works or photos or videos or whatever, and they all live on your own website, and you post them to all the other channels with a prominent link back, and you make some kind of imprecation to your readers to say, or your audience to say, look, who knows how long I'm going to last here. If you're really enjoying this, please switch the way you follow me over to this thing I control. And, the problem is that there aren't these elegant aggregators the way that we have on social media, where you create an account on Facebook and then you follow 1,000 people. No one wants to create 1,000 accounts. One potential way through this is an old technology that's received new interest, which is RSS, really simple syndication, that if you have an RSS reader, you can subscribe to a lot of different heterogeneous feeds. Podcasts run on RSS, and so you can think about there being lots of podcasts hosted in lots of places, run by different kinds of entities that are not controlled by a central agency. And any podcast client can listen to all of those podcasts. And moreover, switching from one podcast client to another is very simple. I think a lot of people have never tried it. If you like iTunes, you're just using, or Apple Podcasts, you're just using it. But if you ever got sick of whatever it is you're using, if you listen to podcasts, know that it's just one click to export the list of your subscriptions and one more click to import it somewhere else, and you're fully caught up. it's a matter of minutes. And if you switch to something else and you don't like it, you can switch to yet a third thing or a fourth or a 10th. And so I think that kind of fluidity would go a long way to resolving the problems. It might not make the people who run the platforms better, but it would make their mistakes less consequential for us.
Thank you.
God, I got so lost. Repeat the question.
Right. Essentially, the question was, because two of our panelists' friends are like, one, I don't use social media to market myself. Two, I don't use social media.
Right.
And so I thought it'd be a nice place to start with, like, what do you think a reason not to use social media is?
I mean, honestly, I have a hard time with social media because I worked as a moderator and ended up with PTSD from moderating the
Sorry.
content. Thank you. I was part of a class action suit where everybody that I used to work with got money from Facebook for ending up with PTSD from their policies, from what they allow, and not protecting their moderators from. So it is very personal to me. But I still end up doom scrolling, and I hate myself for it. I go on to try to promote my books, and 2 hours later, I haven't written anything. So
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Thank you. And I am sorry that you had that experience.
it's in the past.
Yeah. Still sucks, man.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I think that a lot of great points have been made. And of course, we have a wonderful expert here with us. I do absolutely have my frustrations, but also a necessity to use this tool because no one's going to platform a tiny creator like me. So I have to go to build my platforms where I can. But I think that social media can be kind of like a false promise of opportunity. And so that if you go into using it with the assumption that it's going to take you 5 minutes to go viral and 10 minutes to have wild success, then it's going to be a very negative experience. The people who own these businesses are not our friends. They don't care about us. And we are very anonymous to them. And that kind of is, I think, the case no matter the size of your platform. So I feel like the really important thing is to remember social media is a tool, and that you should not believe that those people have your best interests at heart.
Can I add to that? One of the things that my coworkers and I used to say is, if you're not paying, you're not a customer, you're the product. And that is one thing you want to keep in mind when you're using a social media platform is you are the product, you are not a customer.
Can I respectfully disagree? I think that, and I said this in my talk yesterday, there are lots of instances of firms that have their customers in a bind, and whether they take money from those customers or not, they might abuse those customers. So if you own a John Deere tractor, you are assuredly the customer, right? You've spent $600,000 for some mission critical agricultural equipment. When you effect your own repair on your tractor, which you're expected to do, it won't start working until you pay $200 for a John Deere technician to come and type an unlock code to recognize the new part. And so even though you're paying for the product, you're the product. Even though you're paying for the product, you're still the product. And I think that if we look at the history of Facebook and other platforms, I mean, obviously Facebook has a very dark history. It was started by Mark Zuckerberg so that he and his friends could non-consensually rate the fuckability of Harvard undergraduates, right? That was its high water mark, arguably. But there, notwithstanding my funny little joke, there was a time where Facebook really did show you the people you asked to see, and gave you a feed. And what changed? We can say, oh, it was a bait and switch, right? That they would give you something for free and then take it back once you were locked in. And sure, that's what happened, but why did it happen, right? Like what was it that emboldened them to do it in whatever year we want to put that at, 2013 or whatever, and not 2012? And I think that it's the impunity, right? Once they understand that the costs in terms of lost users and lost revenue from worsening the experience of those users, once those costs are outweighed by the expected returns from visiting some horribleness upon those users, then we can expect them to make that change. And so, I think the problem with the prescription, if you're not paying for the product, you're the product, is that it implies if you just start paying, they would have a kind of Grinch Who Stole Christmas moment, and their heart would increase by 3 sizes, and they'd start treating us nicely. You could give Mark Zuckerberg $100 a day for the rest of your life, and the only day he wouldn't piss on you is if you're on fire. And so it's I think that it's not that they treat us well when they respect us. I think it's that they treat us well when they fear us.
Absolutely.
And that's why we have to organize our priorities, our policy priorities around.
So this is a question for everybody, but I'm going to start with you, Corey, because of reasons. So do you feel that collectivism, and this is like a leading question, do you feel collectivism is our best tool to reshape our social media experience to be the tool we can really use versus a tool that...
Do you mean can we solve this by individual choices, or do we need to make group choices?
Yes, I do.
So I think that group choices are notoriously hard to make, right? If you had a night here this weekend where you and a half dozen friends said, the restaurant kind of sucks, let's go get dinner. That's easy to agree on, but where you go and what time you should leave is hard, right? And you maybe ended up having dinner in the restaurant. And so choice architectures, right? It's easier if there's 5 restaurants. Right. One of the reasons this restaurant sucks is there's only one. Right.
Yeah.
This is the AT&T. We don't care. We don't have to. We're the phone company. And one of the ways we can create choice architecture, right, where we can create a plurality of choice that then acts as a disciplining force on the firms, is by using our collective will to do something on the policy level, not on the individual level. It's really hard. I mean, maybe we could all get some kind of pledge bank together where we would say, here are the 100 friends that matter to me on social media. Once 51 of them have pledged to move to wherever, or Blue Sky or Threads or Mastodon, I will move too. And you just have this thing running that runs in the background. Maybe you could, grab some of your social groups and move them out. It's going to be really hard though, because those people are stuck there for lots of reasons, right? Maybe you're there because that's where your rare disease group is meeting, and you can convince 51% of those people to leave. But if someone else is there because that's how they stay in touch with the people in the country they left, they're not going to follow you unless they can convince those people. Those people have a completely different set of priorities and so on. So it's going to be really hard. But if we can use our collective action to create policies that require these companies to have interoperable gateways, so we can go somewhere else and still talk to them. The way that, right now, if you don't like Verizon, you call up T-Mobile and you say, I'd like to switch my account. And 7 seconds later, you're a T-Mobile customer and you keep your phone number, and no one you stay in touch with has to get in touch with you. And you don't all have to agree that we're all going to leave Verizon, much less that we're all going to go to T-Mobile next. You can make that individual choice. So the way that we enable individuals to make choices is by creating a policy space in which those choices don't visit pain upon the people who make them, if that makes sense.
No, it makes wonderful sense, and it's a great answer. Thank you so much. Also, now you've changed how I feel about things. Yes, gentlemen.
I'm going to pull what you just did and say I forgot the question. Can you?
Oh, yeah.
Collective action.
Yeah.
Collective versus individual action.
Well, I personally am more interested in the more individual side of that question, is in if you're a social media user or considering using it, especially for business, what can you do in the meantime? If there are group efforts or policy level things you're interested in, then by all means, you should support those, but no one person can make any of that happen.
Sure.
So the thing that often frustrates me about social media, especially with young people, I would say in general, people under 25-ish, in my experience, so many of them feel like they have to use it. Like there's no other way to accomplish whatever they're looking for it to do. And it's often very hard to convince people that that's simply not true. When I started, I've been writing fiction my whole life, but I didn't start trying to seriously make money with fiction until about 3 years ago. And I'm a type A person, I'm a planner. There are 3 big companies that are supposed to teach you how to actually sell books as a self-published author. There's Mark Dawson, there's self-publishing school. I forget the third one, but I did all three of them, which was a ton of money and a ton of time.
Brian Cohen.
Yeah, and he helped write some of my blurbs too. But what everybody was telling me, not everybody, but a large majority of people were telling me, you basically have to use social media or you're dead in the water. And I have found that that's just not true. I have found creative ways to make my business successful. You know, one thing you certainly lose out on if you're not on social media is visibility to large numbers of people. So the way that I've tried to address that is partly with ads and partly as a more grassroots approach. That's one reason I'm here. I'm an Arizona author, and I do as many conventions as I can. I meet people face to face as much as I can. And of course, that's never going to scale as much as social media potentially could, but depending on what your goals are, that is certainly a viable alternative. And the last thing I would say on it is that it's very easy to downplay the risks to yourself. I mean, we all hear about and talk about and think about, you know, we were talking about how you doom scroll all the time, and it's hard to break that habit. That's one of the main reasons I decided not to use it. And I'm not saying categorically, you know, I'm not anti-social media in and of itself, but I do think of it kind of like a nuclear weapon in that, or maybe a nuclear power plant would be a better example. You know, if you're very careful about how you use it and thoughtful, and you understand how it works and you use it very intentionally, it can certainly do good things for you. But if you use it carelessly or feel obligated to use it, you can certainly have major problems for you and anyone else you interact with there.
Thanks, Tim.
So unlike you, I remember the question, but I don't think I understand it. So,
Oh, well,
so I'll just answer something if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, Corey's a policy guy, so he was talking about like what can we as large groups of people do to make this better.
So my concern there is, this seems a little off topic, but it's not. I use Comcast for the internet and stuff like that, and my wife and I live north of Tangerine and up in Oro Valley, and at a certain point I wanted to push Comcast, and I was getting advertisement for Cox Network, and they were offering all sorts of wonderful things. And so I thought maybe I'd switch. And to make a long story short, what I learned was that you can only, if you live south of Tangerine up in Oro Valley, you can only get your internet service from Cox, not anyone else. There's no competition. If you live north of Tangerine, you can only get your internet service from Comcast. And it's funny, but it's frightening.
It's like the Pope dividing up the new world.
Yeah, and you know, and isn't this called antitrust or something? You know, I'm not a lawyer, but you know, so I'm not sure what I'm saying here, but I feel helpless. Do you know what I mean? I feel really helpless, you know, in terms of all this shit, whether it's Cox versus Comcast or Facebook or any of these things. I feel kind of helpless. Now, the punchline to them shutting down my account was 13 months later, I started getting, so when they shut down my account, I kind of tried to punch together a list of friends and family who were friends of mine, and I sent them friend requests, and they sent me back, we're already friends. And I said, no, they shut down my account. So they accepted my friend request. 13 months later, suddenly they start telling me, Jim, I'm getting your post twice when you post anything. Mm-hmm. And I went and looked, and they reactivated my account 13 months later. I feel helpless. I feel helpless to control what I think is an injustice. But I use Facebook for advertising, and I will continue to use Facebook for advertising.
Thank you, Mr. Doty.
Yeah, I remember back in the live journal days, I was more than happy to try any new social media platform that came along. Dream with JournalFin and several others that I can't even remember. And none of my friends followed me. Getting past that inertia was near impossible. And so all of my friends started going to Facebook, and I'm like, I don't want to. I don't like the interface. And here I am 15 years later, and I can't. All of my friends are on Facebook. I'm stuck. So we need some sort of collective to be able to overcome the inertia of staying put.
Thank you. Yeah.
And if I saw a venue for being part of collective action, I would jump on it, but I don't see that venue, and I'd love to see it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, the European Union's Digital Markets Act is going to force the social media companies to stand at these gateways. We'll see if that bleeds over here. I think your example about telecoms is really well taken. And what's interesting is we do have examples where there are public options in telecoms, but that they run it's not necessarily you get your internet from the government, which is one way to do it, and it can be fine, but it's not the only way. So you have municipalities, for example, where the government puts down conduit, just plastic in the ground that you can run fiber through, and then lets all comers run fiber through it. Or they put down conduit, they run fiber through it, and you can get your internet from the government, but anyone else can run fiber through it, and you can get your internet from them. Or they run fiber through it, they run it to every house, but they have a data center where anyone can terminate the fiber, so you can use the government data center, but you can rent space on it, anyone can. So the government can provide internet to you, and so can you. So there's a whole, like when we think about public provision of social media, like there are obvious dangers, right, to public provision of social media. We see how close relationships between governments and social media, for example, in China, can create a system of control and surveillance that's really nightmarish. But there's a spectrum of ways of doing this where you have public provision of aspects of it and other aspects that can be run by cooperatives, universities, nonprofits, startups, and large firms, and that give you the best of all worlds. And what Comcast and Charter will tell you is that the only way to do this is to have these franchises where the city gives them the exclusive right and they promise to wire up every house in the city. And that, they say, who else is going to pay to go to the most remote house and do it? Well, the public can pay for that. And if we do, we get some real benefits. We've done it before. It's always funny when you hear these arguments, because then you go to farmhouses on the ends of lonely country roads and they've got a phone line and a power line. It's not like those power lines and phone lines were strung by a lost civilization using praxis that we no longer recall, right? It's not embalming pharaohs. So we could probably get wires or conduit out to everyone's house too. And we could do the same with social media. We could provide servers, we could provide protocols, we could provide security, we could provide moderation, we could provide all these services either publicly or privately or in a mix or with nonprofits or with community groups. And what we need is what Mike Masnick calls protocols, not products, right? Things that anyone can plug into, like a set of phone protocols like email and so on. And then you can get a variety of kinds of actors in it.
Thank you.
But if you do that, you have to get access. So I was deeply involved in the deployment of fiber optic telecommunications in the 90s and 2000s. And I was flying to China all the time and things like that. I'll throw an aside. It was really interesting. China owns their internet, right? And the way they put it together was they set up a committee that operates very much like an American corporation, with different title, but the equivalent of a CEO. And they said, "You make this happen." But you have to get so fundamentally all the fiber optic lines that are strung are in public conduit, basically. And so someone has to pay a license to either own or rent that space in the conduit, and that's typically like Comcast or something like that. They may own the fiber optic line, they may not own the fiber optic line. There was a lot of hype in the 1990s that really, you probably didn't hear about it, but it was very much like the AI hype we see now.
That was the run-up to the WorldCom for us.
About running fiber optic cable. And, they spent hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars to string cable all over the world, and then it all crashed. All right, this giant bubble crashed. So So I'm not sure how that would
Well,
work.
just because there are bad ways to deploy fiber, it doesn't, like, speaking as someone, so we now have fiber at my home because Newsom has promised to run public fiber.
Fiber in
And
the
so
home, huh?
AT&T has finally got off its ass and run fiber in advance of public provision of fiber. Having a 2 gigabit symmetrical connection is not like anything you've ever imagined. It's incredible. There are about 700 municipalities in the United States, mostly in red states, mostly small towns with public fiber. And they're the only people in America who are consistently happy with their internet service. And so, that, like, there are ways to do, as I say, not just public provision, but public-private provision. In the same way that, it would be very weird. There are places where the private firms own the roads, but by and large, we have the same problem with roads. You need a right of way. It's a public good and whatever. But it'd be very, we can have the roads, and those roads can be social media roads too. They can be protocols, they can be servers, they can be identity services, all the parts that social media decomposes into that can then be recomposed in different ways by different kinds of people. To its credit, I think that's what Blue Sky is trying to do. I wish they would finish the part where it's easy to leave one Blue Sky server and go to another. They haven't even got to the part where there's another Blue Sky server. So I worry that they're setting themselves up for failure.
So, we think of fiber optic telecommunications equipment, and well, there's things like the Cisco 16664 switch, right? That's a switch, right? It's only $200,000 or $300,000. All right, it's not just a fucking switch, So, and that's just a method of routing traffic after the fibers brought the traffic into it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's just a method of routing. Okay, this packet of information needs to go into that fiber optic line to go in that direction. It's just come out of this one. It's enormously expensive. I'm not sure of this blue. So are they putting together?
Well, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
We've gone from an
sorry.
analogy into a rat hole.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, so to get back on topic, thank you, Mr. Doty, for your experiences. Did you get an opportunity?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
great. Thank you. So, I'm a really big believer in having regulation and creating, and I loved the way you put your discussion about, like, having the space to create the policy, because individual choice, collective action only get you so far. Thank you. That was so beautifully put. Since I work in social media space, and this is like my ability to do my work is in that space, then making it more fluid and having fewer boundaries and being able to move my followers from space to space is very critical and very hard to make happen. So, I want to get back into some of the social media myths and realities and the ways we can use it constructively and the ways in which it can do harm. And of course, we have some people who've had very direct harm from social media on our panel today. Thank you. But let's talk a little bit about, like, a bit of hope for where having some regulation and having a better space could take us and what we would like to see from social media.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Dr. Corey,
Sure.
may I work up to you, because I
Sure, of course.
Perfect, thank you. What would be your hope for a place that social media could go to make our experience better?
Oh, goodness. I mean, my hope would be that people actually take responsibility for themselves. Goodness, I love social media for the communication aspect. I have a slight stutter, and I am autistic, so I have a hard time talking to people face to face. You get me online, and I can talk. I'm not stuttering. I'm not having issues. People take me seriously because I actually sound like I know what I'm talking about, because I do. But face to face, I stutter. I defer to everyone else. So I love that there are those positive aspects of social media, of giving people who normally can't make their voices work. But I have seen the dark side, and I don't know how to get rid of it, because a lot of that dark side is just the darker human nature when everybody is under pressure. People need a place to vent, and that vent has been social media lately.
Thank you. Yeah, I do think there's this challenge with like making your personal responsibility sort of centered in your practice, and also acknowledging that there's like this really massive problems existing in human society that are not, there's not an easy solution to them, and those are reflected in our social media spaces as well. So just because it's virtual does not mean that it's not cultural and people aren't having an impact on how that culture develops. And we bring all of our prejudices and our hates and our intersection of oppression into that space as well. And so to ignore that and to pretend like I can just make a personal choice to control this space and to make everything better is, I think, to our detriment. But also, like, this empowerment that you can have when you are somebody who cannot be in person with people and cannot be in community with people easily is, I think, the joy and the value of social media. And so when it's working, when it's good, it is very, very good. And when it is bad, it is awful, right? And so I would hope that we can have more spaces where we have control over how we shape our space, and we are able to put more protections in place from greed at a corporate level that allows like bad actors to just persist. And it's not a simple solution, and it is not something where I can just be like, oh, everybody boycott Twitter. You can't necessarily just avoid the kind of hatefulness you are seeing on Twitter by hopping platforms. Like, it's a bigger problem than just one particular technology space. Sir.
Oh, sorry. Do you guys want to go? Yeah.
I definitely agree that, I think this is obviously a hugely complicated question with many moving pieces to it. In terms of how people act on social media, that's ultimately nothing but that individual's choice about how to act. And when we live in a culture that is in some ways very sick, we shouldn't be surprised when a lot of people behave poorly, sometimes abhorrently on social media, especially if they're anonymous. There's not much you as an individual can do about that, except make some maybe different choices about how you use it. But in terms of, what can we do to maybe move toward a version or evolution of social media that's healthier and better, one of the big things I would like to see is increased competition and actually having to pay for this service. And there's, the fact that social media is funded primarily by advertising dollars, which is why you're able to use it for free. I'm not saying that's categorically and universally bad, but there are major dangers and downsides that come with that. You're talking about holding social media companies accountable for their behavior. The main way to do that is you, the customer, are the one directly providing the money that they need to exist. And the second they cease to provide value that's worth it to you, you've canceled your subscription. And if enough people do that, they go out of existence. I think we're starting to see some really promising alternatives on a small scale. For example, there are a couple of YouTube alternative platforms, one called Locals. We all have our issues with YouTube. And, Locals is a service where, the platform itself is free, but whoever you want to subscribe to or follow, you pay some kind of membership fee to that creator. They keep most of that fee, and the platform takes a small percentage from them to cover their costs. But that completely eliminates the advertising angle, which, that could be 70 whole panels in itself about the pros and cons of funding these things with ad dollars. But in general, in a very succinct nutshell, my experience has always been that the shorter the bridge between customer and provider,
the fewer middlemen in there, the better the product and service you're going to get.
So I'm going to bootstrap on that, and I'll try to stay on topic this time. I don't know if this is a coincidence, but before Facebook shut that account down, I was paying them a couple $1,000s a month in advertising. Okay, and as a experiment, you got to experiment with your advertising to make sure it's working well. I shut all the advertising down. Now, with Amazon advertising, you want to be very careful. Their algorithms don't like it when you shut it down. Facebook's a little bit more forgiving in that respect. At least they were 2 or 3 years ago. And what I learned was when I shut it down, turned it back on, a month later, shut it down, turned it back on, tried a few times. I was paying $2,000 and I was only making $1,500. By shutting it down, I only lost about $1,500 a month in revenue. So I shut it down. Now, when I say I'm bootstrapping on your comments, I've always suspected it was about 6 months after that they shut me down with that email saying your account is this type of account, and if you don't fix it, we're going to shut you down. And I've always wondered if since I stopped paying them, did they shut me down? Now I'm not typically a paranoid person, but if that's true, that kind of adds, so that's one data point. It's not a large ensemble of information, but if that's true, that would say that what you're proposing has some validity.
So, but what is your hope for a better social media rather than your, I empathize with your negative experiences and I'm sorry they happened, but we're sort of like looking forward to what we would like from a better social media experience.
I'm not sure what I could hope for. I have mixed feelings about regulation, and we have a really serious monopoly with Facebook and Mr. Zuckerberg and his control over it. I'd like to see more competition out there, but right now I don't think that's going to happen because you mentioned this kind of thing in your talk the other day, and forgive me for paraphrasing you because I'm probably doing it wrong, but you know, we do have a monopoly when it comes to Facebook, and it's authorized, and I think, you know, more competition would be a wonderful thing. And how do we get there?
So I have some ideas about that. I think that when we talk about the problems of these platforms, they're very real. And we come to a juncture very quickly about whether we're going to try to make the platforms reduce the problems that people experience with them, or whether we're going to make the platforms less powerful so that those problems don't matter as much to the people who use them. And I think we've had about 20 years of making these kind of content-based rules. You know, you must prevent harassment, you must prevent other kinds of bad activity. It's visited a terrible toll on moderators who are asked to implement these policies, and it hasn't worked, right? No one's going to say, well, the output of 20 years of this is a much more civil internet. You know, when you get to, if you find yourself at the bottom of the hole, maybe stop digging. And so I've been thinking a lot about what makes an administratable policy, a policy that we can actually like enforce. So one of the problems with the policy against harassment is first you have to agree on what harassment is. Then you have to agree on whether someone harassed someone else. Then you have to agree on whether or not the platform took adequate measures to prevent that harassment, which involves, you know, basically giving their server hardware a colonoscopy, because to a first approximation, everyone who understands how Facebook works for Facebook. So this is a very fact-intensive, difficult to adjudicate question. By the time you solve one of them, it's been 7 years and 25 million more people have complaints. But what if we had a so on Mastodon, which is a open source alternative social media platform. If you're on a Mastodon server, which is like being on an email server, you join one, but you can talk to all of them. If you're on a Mastodon server and you don't like the way it's being run, you can click one link in your settings and it'll export all the people you follow and all the people who follow you. You can sign up for any other server and you can click one link in your settings, put that file there, and everyone moves over. It's like changing phone carriers. We could just make that mandatory. We could just say, if you operate a social media service, maybe above a certain size threshold, you are required to offer this. Now, the thing about this as an adjudicatable process is, say, I'm on Jim's server and he kicks me off and he's legally required to just give me this file when he kicks me off. And I say he didn't. And I go to the regulator and I say, Jim didn't give me the file. Jim says, no, he did, I did. That Corey's lying. He's a pain in the ass. That's why I kicked him off. You don't have to figure out who's lying. You say to Jim, I don't care who's lying. Give me Corey's file. I'll pass it on to him. And we're done, right? We have the entire thing could be administered in bulk by lightly trained people, at a scale that matches the scale of social media. And so that would be the right to exit. We also have this problem on social media that they really would prefer not that you get a feed of the things you want to see, but the things they'd like you to see, things that someone will pay them to show you, ads, boosted content, and so on. That has lots of problems. Some of them have to do with the civility and what you see in your platform, but also, like, if you're a publisher and people follow you, you don't get to post to them unless you pay to boost your own content. And there's a way to think about this that it's just fraud, right? If you're the platform and you say, tell me who you like and I'll show you what they post, and then you don't, this feels like, Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act bans unfair and deceptive methods of competition. This feels unfair and deceptive. I told you I'd give you X and I gave you Y. So we could again say you have an end-to-end responsibility. If someone asks to see something and someone else puts that thing on there, you're required to deliver it. Your only role, like a net neutrality rule for social media, your only role is to deliver data from willing senders to willing receivers quickly and reliably as you can. And again, if we think someone's cheating, you post a message and you see whether it reaches your followers. You don't have to examine the server hardware. You can just say, it looks like you're cheating. I don't care if it's a technical error or what. You've got 30 days to cure it, or we're going to fine you 5% of your global turnover every day until you do. And so these are very adjudicatable remedies. They're remedies that if they were implemented not in the US but in Europe, would redound to the US's benefit. And this kind of anti-tech antitrust is surging everywhere. The Chinese cyberspace directive actually bans Chinese tech companies from blocking new market entrants who try to do interoperability. So even the Chinese government is like, wow, these companies are too big and powerful, and they're threatening the power of the state. We're going to make them weaker by promoting competition. So there are lots of other places where these rules could come in. And one weird phenomenon of global capitalism is that because these companies cheat in the same way in every country, if someone wins a case in one place, like when Europe won an antitrust case against Apple, South Korea and Japan brought the same case using the same exhibits and won it there too. So you don't have to be a 500 million consumer first world bloc like the European Union to win a case against Apple. You can just draft on that case in every country where Apple operates.
Yes, so let's take a few questions from the audience. You've all been wonderful listeners. Thank you so much. Daniel, would you start us off, please?
Yes. I'm just curious to know, what social media do you, if you still use, what's effective? And then just briefly, and are you using alternative? Are you using, for example, are you a Liz Danforth who has her own Discord, which is very active and productive for her, and let's screw the rest of it? And when you were talking about when you were talking about Mastodon, I kept thinking Discord. A lot of people are using Discord. They can curate it. You can change channels, jump into a channel. Yes, you do have to be a little. It has a less user-friendly interface, but if you're a geek and a nerd, it's pretty. It's pretty. So if you could talk about that.
Great. So the question is, what alternatives are you using, and what's your favorite? Yeah, great. Did I get that?
What's working?
What's working? Thank you, Daniel.
Right now, nothing's working for me. I was starting to gain some traction on Twitter right before Musk took it over. And as soon as that happened, I became invisible. I don't have the face for TikTok, but I have seen a lot of other indie authors like me who really take off on TikTok. That it seems really fun, but I don't have it in me. All of my people who follow me are on Facebook, unfortunately. And I've tried Discord. I use Discord for gaming, so that was a natural pivot for me, but nobody followed me.
So
The inertia thing.
thank you. I have a newsletter. I run a Discord. I'm on Facebook. I have archived my account on Twitter. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Threads. I haven't done Blue Sky yet. I kind of go where I'm enjoying myself, but I post everywhere. And a dear friend of mine suggested the posse approach. So I post to my website and I go from there. And I'm also on Patreon. So honestly, so I try and make my content and spread it as far as what, and I'm on YouTube too, right? So I love my newsletter the most until my platform got bought by GoDaddy. And so I have to rebuild my newsletter from the ground up again, which was a big heartbreak for me. So, but I'm hoping to start that up again. Yeah. And Liz, I love your Discord. It's very sweet.
I'd like to respond to your question by narrowing it a little bit. One thing that I think doesn't get nearly enough emphasis when this question comes up is, I think the question really needs to be not what works, but what works for you. I don't use social media now, but I did use it extensively from 2010 to about 2018. And over those 8 years, I spent over $250,000 on ads and hiring marketing people and organic growth. And I'm just a guy. I'm far from rich. That was a lot of money for me. None of it ever went anywhere in any significant way for me. That doesn't mean it can't or won't work for you, but I think what a lot of people aren't stressing enough is two things. First of all, whatever platform you're considering using, that has to be something that at least to some minimum extent you enjoy doing and that fits your personality. If you're forcing it and you're thinking, I hate this, you've already lost. And then another thing is, even if you do find it's going to take a lot of experimentation. If you do find some combination of platforms or strategies that work for you, they're going to change in about 2 days. And that's probably a big part of the reason it ever worked for me. So take everything with a grain of salt. And unfortunately, I think it's one of those things where other people's advice, it almost doesn't matter how good their advice is, because I think to a very large extent, you're going to have to figure most of this out for yourself, because there are so many variables and it changes so often.
I'm looking into some new facilities that Facebook has in advertising, and it really depends upon what you're trying to accomplish. That's a big thing. If you're trying to spread your blog post, to spread news about your blog post, that's very different from trying to gain new readers for your novels and things of that nature. And so I'm mostly focused on the latter, and I'm focused on communicating with fans and fan base. So Instagram, it's also what works for you, and Instagram is not right for me and things of that nature. So I probably will begin using Facebook advertising again, because they have some new facilities that allow you to set up set up 4 or 5 ads with differences in the ad, and according to a number of author friends of mine, their algorithms will now, you can trigger their algorithms to now test those ads, and they'll focus your money on the ad that is working best for you. I haven't used it myself. I've had a number of friends who said it's actually a very good way to go, and they've had good success with it. So I'm going to start experimenting with it and see.
Thank you.
Sorry, real quick, can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
I forgot that I actually, are we?
Right.
Oh, sorry. I mean, I'm a posse guy. I have a bunch of legacy accounts on platforms where I have large followings where I regret it because I'm stuck there now. So that would be Twitter, Mastodon, or Twitter, Medium, and Tumblr. I run my own WordPress server on my own hardware, which is not a thing most people are going to do. I have my own mail server. I run my own mailing list. And I post everything to this WordPress server, and then I turn it into an email message, a Tumblr post, a Medium post, a Twitter thread, a Mastodon thread. It goes up on Discourse, and there's RSS. And so and all of those are linking back to the canonical link, and all of those have these kind of like, hey, Rome is falling when we are, the Tsar is going to kick us out of Anatevka. Here's my forwarding address. Please, just go and find me there. Stop looking for me here because it's not going to last.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. And thank you for being at TUSCON. Thank you, Mr. Buckfield. Tim, would you pass me down the
Sorry to
microphone?
rant
Thank
on
you.
No, you're fine. That's what we're here to do, is rant for an hour.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Tori, and thank you for giving me a really